as German political unification was accomplished in 1871. A fundamental and irreversible changing of power in Europe occurred. France and Britain had long determined the political structure of the continent. But now they had a new competitor, one that had not industrialized as early as its neighbors, but was now progressing quite rapidly. Germany developed very fast steel production, railway network, the chemical industry, and army technology. These events fueled economic rivalry and even diplomatic suspicion and military tensions. European states were becoming more and more predisposed to the belief that another great war was imminent even at peacetime. Behind this tension that was growing was much more than rivalry amongst the great powers. Multinational empires were gradually undermined internally by the nationalism that had developed in the strength of the 19th century. The Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires were unable to stand united, a people separated by language, religion, and identity. No part of Europe was subject to this strain more truly than in the Balkans. The Serbian nationalism, which was exerted by the ideal of unification of the South Slavic peoples, was developing at an increasing pace, and Austria-Hungary regarded these intentions as the direct threat to its existence. The great powers, on the other hand, were only too ready to use Balkan tensions and pursue personal strategic interests. Under such an atmosphere of fear and competition, the politics in Europe was characterized by inflexible alliances. The Triple Alliance between Germany and Austria-Hungary and Italy were on one side, and the Triple Entente between Britain, France, and Russia on the other. These alliances were to prevent aggression, but practically this increased war to a great extent. A local crisis could now have the same effect, and whole continents would be involved in the war. Diplomacy was no longer flexible, and the foreign policy was more dictated by the military planning. General staffs were ready to go to war in the most painstaking manner, and when once the war was declared, there was no time to be wasted. On June 28, 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo revealed the frailty of this system. The act was the combination of the radical Serbian nationalist networks, but its ramifications went way beyond the Balkans. With the agreement of Germany, Austria-Hungary gave a rudimentary ultimatum to Serbia. In spite of the fact that Serbia gave in to the majority of the requests, its unwillingness to surrender fully was sufficient to warrant war. Russia rallied around Serbia, and Germany declared war on Russia and later France. Britain got involved in the war when the Germans attacked Belgium and aimed at reaching Paris. In several weeks, Europe was in a war that had never been witnessed in history. Initially, everyone thought that the war would not be long. Patriotic zeal led soldiers to the front, where they were sure that they were going back home in a few months. This illusion ended in the Western Front when the offensive of the Germans was stopped in the Battle of the Marne. That was followed by a lethal standoff on the North Sea to the Swiss border. Hundreds of kilometers of trenches were dug by opposing armies. Such trenches had turned into not only defensive posts, but their own mini-worlds, where men spent months and years of survival being on the front lines. Daily life at the front was characterized by mud, cold, hunger, disease, and unremitting artillery fire. The trench warfare has turned the war to a serious war of attrition. Frontal assaults were atrociously expensive in terms of machine guns and heavy artillery. Millions of lives might be lost within one day to give up just a few hundred meters. As a way of breaking the impasse, therefore, the two parties resorted to new and more destructive technologies. Poison gas made battlefields death traps without leaving doubtful marks. Tanks were invented to pass over trenches and barbed wires, and the aircraft were improved as they turned into weapon of the air. Bombing. The First World War was an experiment into the modern warfare. Technology innovation and mass destruction progressed in parallel. The Eastern Front was another form of war. The expanses of land also allowed people to move much more, and the combats were not as fixed as in the West. German troops were able to gain large victories over the Russian army, with the most prominent victors being Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes. Russia had problems maintaining the war, although it had a huge manpower. The society was taken to its edge by economic meltdown, food scarcity, and political oppression. In 1917, revolution erupted. The revolution of the Tsarist regime and Bolsheviks altered the war. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk saw Russia withdrawing out of the war. It gave Germany vast territories in the East Territories that, however, did not change the final result of the war. The Ottoman Empire had entered the war, extending it outside Europe. New fronts were opened in Gallipoli, in the Caucasus, Mesopotamia, Palestine, and Arabia. Gallipoli campaign turned out to be one of the most significant and symbolic battles of the war. The Entente allies wanted to seize Istanbul, blindfold the Ottoman Empire in the war, and have a supply channel to Russia. However, the Ottoman opposition stopped the invasion at a very high price. Defense of Gallipoli not only stretched the war, but it also gave rise to people who would become their presidents in the future, and this would be the modern Middle East and Turkey. War in the Middle East and Empire were beyond any possibility of separation. Britain and France also had a secret agreement to divide the Ottoman countries after the war and were fueling Arab uprisings against the Ottoman rule. These war promises and arrangements formed the basis of the new boundaries that had a little concern with the local realities. The political situation was chaotic and disorganized when the war ended, and it would be used by decades to create conflict in the region. The turning point was in the year 1917. It is the unlimited German submarine warfare and the discovery of the Zimmermann telegram that forced the United States to join the war on the side of the Entente. The industrial potential and new supply of manpower in America had a vital contribution to the exhausted Allied armies. Germany made one last great offensive in the Western Front, with hopes that they would win it before the American might even be able to fully mobilize. The effort failed. With the collapse of the front lines, hunger, strikes, and riots spread even to Germany itself. The battlefield was more and more involved in the war. Whole communities were mobilized in what was to be the first actual manifestation of the concept known as total war. The industrial production was shifted to the military requirements. Women worked in factories, transport and farming, playing critical roles as men were in the front line in millions. People were bombarded, blocked and contracted diseases, and died at a scale not previously experienced. The propaganda turned into an effective weapon, installing the opinion and maintaining the morale. By autumn of 1918, the defeat of the Central Powers was inevitable. Austria-Hungary and Ottoman Empire started falling apart internally. Bulgaria capitulated and Germany was left alone. The political turmoil broke out all over the German Empire. The monarchy fell, and the new government demanded an armistice. The guns finally became silent on November 11th, 1918. Peace that ensued did not bring about any enduring stability. The Versailles Treaty caused bitter feelings and humiliation as it required Germany to part with a great deal of its territory, limitations on its military forces, and heavy reparations. The Ottoman and the Austro-Hungarian empires were destroyed, and other states arose in Europe and the Middle East. However, ethnic and political realities were overlooked by these new borders. The First World War changed maps, civilizations, and ideologies, with approximately 10 million soldiers killed and numerous civilians killed. It was not the culmination, but the start of a turbulent century, the conflicts of which were deeply based on the consequences of this world disaster.